Howdy. Today we're going to talk about arrows, broadheads, a little bit about FOC. I have saved all of my arrows that I've harvested animals with. I'm going to get a weight and kind of specs on each of these and try and jog my memory of what bow and poundage and shot distance, what the animal was, and just kind of give you my experience that I've had with different arrows, fletchings, broadhead combinations, and just kind of have an open, non-confrontational discussion about what works for y'all. So stay tuned. Let me get these specs. I have compiled all the data on these arrows to go over with you. But first, I want to talk about the arrow that I'm potentially building to hunt with for the 2022 season. I kind of have my bread and butter stuff. If you guys have seen some of my other videos, I am going to try something a little bit different this year. My good friend Cody that works for Gold Tip was kind of making fun of me for shooting these older Levi Morgan edition gold tips. They're the same as a Velocity XT. They work good. I like them, and I like Levi. He's a good dude. But anyways, I'll get made fun of if that means getting hooked up with some arrows. So he did. I told him I wanted to try some gold tips that I like the specs on, that I don't really see actually anybody using this gold tip arrow, which is kind of weird. So I'm going to run, these are the Black Label Quantums. They're a 204 inside diameter, so 5 millimeters. That's a really popular diameter these days because of the components and stuff that are available for them as far as aftermarket option stuff for them. But what I do like versus like their Kinetic 204s is that these are lighter grains per inch, so I can put more of my overall weight up in the front end of the arrow. They're a 0025 straightness, so that's good. These are 340s. They're 7.7 grains per inch. And gosh, I think the 340s in a Kinetic gold tip are pushing 10, 11 grains an inch. This kind of falls into the category of the gold tip airstrikes, which I personally don't like just from selling them in the past. I don't like their coating. I didn't like their consistency as far as them spinning. Even spinning a bear shaft in a airstrike with no components, we were seeing not good things. And then sometimes their components being iffy magnified that. So I was considering running a Easton 5mm half out in these. I ran them in Axis. The aluminum one's bent. I haven't tried the stainless. I'm just looking for something that's going to be the most durable. So I was doing some reading in Western Hunter, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he's talking about overall forgiveness, arrows, bows, stuff like that. Gave me an idea of what he said, and I think there's a few other people doing it. So these come standard with this aluminum half out that go in, glue in, and then this aluminum collar goes over the top. I guess there's people having structural integrity issues with that. So in that article, he's running an Easton Hit Insert, which is hidden insert technology that sets the insert down inside. So I'm gonna do that, and then I'm gonna glue this collar on top, so it'll be flush with the end of the carbon to give it some rigidity and strength up there. I'll epoxy that on, and then screw my broadheads into it. What's gonna be different for me, you guys know I like to glue my broadheads in with the inserts, align them to the vane. Not necessarily that it makes it fly better, but it makes each arrow uniform. And I believe, I haven't done testing, that it'll make your arrow quieter if your airflow is even from front to back. Just for grins, I'm going to scrap that this year, throw it out the window. And because those hit inserts, it's very difficult to glue them in and get stuff to align up. So for the heck of it, I'm just gonna try screwing broadheads in. I'll have to probably shoot more broadheads to verify that they're hitting where I want. But yeah. And by the way, I spun every single one of those 24 that Cody sent me, and they're all really, really super good. They spin nice and straight. There was maybe 2 that had a teeny bit of wobble in the back end. So across the board, OCD me, like to keep my labels on the arrows the same. I'll probably cut 1 inch off the back of each of those, fletch them up with somewhere a 2 to 2.6 inch 4 fletch with a left helical, maybe left offset. Yeah. All right, let's dive into these arrows that I've harvested animals with. So, arrow number 1, late 90s, my first deer. This is an ACC 360. I've got a 100 grain bare razor head up on the front. This arrow is bent because of the aluminum core. So first deer, 71 yards, hit it in the hips. Followed up shot a couple 100 yards later. It was in a clear cut, tracked her down, shot her at 20 yards in the throat and dropped her. This arrow's 416 grains. I shot it out of a Martin Cougar 2000 at 70 pounds. Arrow number 2, this is an ACC 360 as well, but 4 fletch on the back. You can see it broke. 100 grain Thunderhead, overall weight 428 grains. Shot out of a 68 pound Matthews Q2XL. That was a 20-yard heart shot that was very tight to the shoulder. So I think I penetrated somewhere up into there. I saw it buried deep. I think she only went 40 yards and just piled up. That arrow snapped when she crashed. Arrow number 3 is a Beeman ICS 340. Had a 100 grain interlock up on the front there. This was 429 grains, shooting it out of that same Q2XL. I shot a hog in Idaho, 12 yards. I guess this is actually the second arrow. I had to shoot it twice. So the first arrow was 12 yards, slightly quartering 2, hit 1 lung, completely passed through that pig and hit another pig in the scruff of the neck. And then we tried to track that pig down that got hit in the neck and couldn't make it happen. We contacted the rancher. He said he'd take care of it. But this was the follow-up arrow at like 7 yards. This was double lung, clean pass through, and it went like 10 yards and just bled out. So next one, got another Beeman ICS 340. See, that one's broken at the back. Had a 100 grain interlock on the front there. Same 429 grains, same bow, Q2XL, 68 pounds. This was a 20-yard heart shot, tight to the shoulder on a black-tailed doe. Oh, she probably went 50 yards and piled up. Big boy. I regretted this year. I'll explain more. So this was a 2315 Easton Super Slam, 125 grain Thunderhead. We're running 4 fletch, flex fletch 360s on the back there. 552 grains. Shot a black-tailed doe at 23 yards. She was facing away from me, looking back, and just shot her right in the center of the neck and just dropped her completely. It was kind of interesting. The arrow went in and hung up right there on her spine. She dropped into the brush, and all we could see was the broadhead sticking up, and it was just moving ever so slightly, twitching, I guess. So just watch that till this guy stopped moving, and then recovered her right there. It was pretty awesome. She was a huge doe. You know, I was in my young 20s then, and me and my buddy Brandon, we gutted her out and we were probably a mile from the truck, dragged her a little bit, and then probably the last quarter of the mile, I was like, I want to get back. This is late December, Washington, snowy, cold, and I was tired, so I threw her over my shoulders, bleeding all over, hiked her that last quarter mile out uphill to the truck. So why this arrow switch that year was bad? Oh, I forgot to mention, that was out of a Matthews Conquest 3, 68, 70 pounds, somewhere in there. So I wanted to go ultra heavy that year, and this is like 2002. Switched to this heavy arrow. I had lent my rangefinder to Aaron Schneider, and I never got it back. I forgive you. So I couldn't range anything that year, but shot that doe in September with this, or in December, but in September I was hunting with my wife, spotted a blacktail buck on this closed logging road, stalked in on him, he moved position, I came around the corner and there was two giant 4x4 plus blacktails, easily 140 inches or better. Don't believe me, I don't care. They were monster book record blacktails. I guess 35 yards, pulled back on the biggest dude, split my 30 and 40 on him, launched an arrow, saw it going. I was like, oh my gosh, this is happening. That deer is dead. And that arrow just continued to drop and just went right under his brisket. I was sick to my stomach. I think I cried and laid in bed all day, maybe a couple days. My wife remembers that story pretty well. So yeah, that's probably the heaviest arrow that I've ever shot, 550 grains, and especially hunting without a rangefinder, being off by 5 yards, screwed the pooch on that one. So next one is a Easton Epic 340, 4-fletch again, broken. Muzzy 90 grain, 4-blade on there. Overall weight was 407 grains. I shot this out of a Archery Research 34 bow. Black-tailed doe, 23-yard throat shot. Dropped her. She was still kicking in this little gully right below me. Follow-up shot was probably 12 to 15 yards through the lungs. Finished her off quick. So that one broke. I don't think that one got full pass through, or maybe this was the one that was double lunged. Okay. Trying to remember, this was many years ago. I think the first shot zipped through, kept going, never found it. This was the second shot when she was below me, laying on the ground kicking. So that's why that one broke. Next one is that one's broken too. Carbon Express CX400, which is, I think, equivalent to a 200 spine. Carbon Express does their numbers backwards. This was a 125 grain Magnus Stinger. Overall weight 480 grains. Shot out of a Hoyt Ultratech at 70 pounds. This was an interesting one. It was a one shot, one kill. I was stalking down a logging road back in Washington. Saw this black-tailed doe feeding in the clear cut. I stalked in as close as I could, ranged her at 43 yards, slightly downhill, slightly quartering away. It entered perfectly at the back of the 10 ring, and she just dropped. Completely dropped. Waited for a little while, went in to recover her after not seeing any movement, and upon skinning her out, maybe I saw once I was gutting her where it exited out, but it exited right up in here. So it went in, hit something, ricocheted, but I think it hit the lungs, nicked the top of the spine, and then exited right up out here. But instant fatality, dropped her, so that was pretty cool. Next, The next one I don't have. No, I do. Okay, I confused myself. So this, I don't have the arrow for, so this is just a example one, but I shot an ACC 349 with 100 grain Thunderhead, 428 grains. It was a 30-yard shot, double lung on a blacktail buck. Arrow zipped clean through, kept going. He went like 50 yards and piled up. So that was cool. That worked out good. This arrow, I recovered the arrow, but I did not recover the deer. This was again out of a Q2XL, 68 pounds, 429 grain arrow or so. Blacktail doe, Hail Mary shot, and this is where I'll be honest with you guys that I've learned from the mistakes that I've made on shots. I'm 100% more particular on the shots I take, but being young and stupid and wanting to harvest animals, I did some stupid stuff. I learned from it and won't do it again. Doe is 90 yards, running through the clear cut, bouncing. I had that bow sighted out to a 60-yard pin, 5-pin. There was no sliders back then. Shot. Didn't know if I hit it or not. I figured there was no way I did. Eventually went up there. This was the arrow found. It was sticking straight up out of the ground. Just covered in frothy lung blood. Pure luck, pure stupid. Double-sided blood trail all through the thick reprod there. My wife and I, we searched till it was dark, till it was after dark, had our flashlights out. Eventually the kind of the tracks went every which direction and the blood dried up. Flashlight batteries died. And then we were hearing all kinds of noises in the woods just creeping around, and we were freaked out, and pretty sure that a cat got it, dragged it off. I don't know what happened. We went back the next day with a buddy or two and just scoured all through there, couldn't turn it up. So next one, this is a Axis 400, again snapped, slick trick 125 grain. This arrow weighed 425 grains, shooting it out of a 60-pound Hoyt 38 Pro, or I can't remember if it was a Pro 38. This was a whitetail buck, Eastern Washington, 14 yards. I was shooting a thumb trigger, and that's why I'll never hunt with a thumb trigger again, because when I ripped it off, punched it, it was less forgiving than when I punched my index. So that shot sailed high at 14 yards, spined it, buck dropped, spinning around on the ground. For the life of me, I don't remember if this was the first arrow or second arrow, but anyways, shot another one, trying to go for the throat on the ground, hit, a little bit left or right, kind of went down into the back strap, slowed him down a little bit more. Had to take my Alaskan guide knife that Schneider gave me. Maybe he traded me that knife for the rangefinder. I don't know. But anyways, took that big knife, kind of chose my moment with the buck, and finished him off. Next one, this is a Carbon Storm Easton 500. I got a fancy biter target knock on there. 100 grain wasp bullet on the front there. This was out of a 60-pound Matthews DXT, and it was right about a 20-yard shot, double lung on a tiny little blacktail buck. It was so small I thought it was a doe, but it was 343 grains, slightly quartering away, just zipped right through that deer, and he went like 70 yards and piled up. Next one, this is a gold tip Pro Hunter 400. Some tape on there, broke. 125 grain slick trick. This was down in Texas on a hunt. I shot a doll ram at 20-ish, 23 yards, I think it was, out of a tripod tree stand. Double lunged him. He went, I don't know, 80 to 100 yards and piled up pretty dang fast. That was out of a Bowtech Prodigy 60 pounder. Oh, next one. Another broken guy. This is a Victory VAP 400 aluminum outsert on there with a 100 grain terminal T. Overall weight was 398 grains, and it was out of a Bowtech CPXL 50 pounder. Shot her at 35 yards. Probably the third deer out of the ones that I've talked here that was heart shot, low, very tight to the shoulder. So this guy buried in completely. She fell over, snapped it, and I actually found this in her chest cavity, in or by her heart when we were dressing her out. But gosh, she only went 50, 60 yards and piled up with that one shot there. My last bow kill, my last and probably my greatest bow kill that I am most proud of, 2017 here in Idaho, our home state now. Did backpacking elk hunting with my cousin Bobby. I chose to use a 45 pound bear recurve. Since I was working for Bear at the time, and we were going to be doing a lot of hiking, so I wanted an ultra lightweight bow. But it panned out. Got my first elk, first trad bow harvest ever. This was 446 grain. The Black Eagle, vintage 500 spine, 125 grain Bear razor head. Roughly an 18-yard shot, double lung. I'll call it a pass through. Here's what I think happened. I saw that arrow disappear into his rib cage completely. He took off running. Cal called to stop him, and in the midst of it, side story, in the midst of Cal calling him, another spike ran in, and my cousin shot him with his compound at like 20 something yards. So that was pretty cool. So we got on the trail of this elk, trying to find my arrow. We eventually found it probably about 30 yards up the hill from where I shot him, just laying flat on the ground, covered in lung blood. So I don't think it passed through and kept going 30 yards, to be honest. I would say it probably passed through. Since I saw this knock disappear, I'd say it passed through and was maybe hanging out the other side for a split second or something and then dropped out. But it held together. Broadhead penetrated really well. Now here's where we get into talking about broadheads. He did not bleed. Even though it was perfect entrance, exited at the same spot, it didn't do any funny deflections or anything like that, but that two blade just created a little slit. So he was bleeding internally. We waited about 30 minutes. It was dark by then. We got up the hill. We saw him bedded down. We could just see his eyeballs, and we backed off. We didn't want to jump him or do anything, so we sat down at the bottom of the hill. And I kind of hate admitting this, but I would say it probably took him in the neighborhood of an hour to an hour and a half to die. And I don't know if that's because the blood wasn't exiting externally, if it was internally. But we'd hear him cough every so often. Eventually heard a big crash. He made it about 5 more yards from where we originally saw him bedded, and expired. So definitely I want to, going forward, either stick with a 3 blade if that's what I'm feeling, but more than likely I will shoot a Stinger 4 blade from here on out. I'm also looking at some of the Swacker stuff in a fixed head. They've got some similar styles to this with bleeder blades. To me, it kind of looks like Swacker bought Steel Force broadheads. which I've used those in the past. I don't have any here. I think I only shot one deer with a steel force. That was a mule deer doe. I want to say it was with this same set of arrows, but with the steel force on there. Big mule deer doe, Eastern Washington, broadside at like 40 yards. As I shot, she spun, took it up the right cheek, saw it buried to the nock, gave her several hours, very little blood, didn't recover. I have a nemesis with mule deer. I just can't seem to close the deal. I've shot a couple one whitetail buck with a bow, one whitetail doe with a rifle, and then a handful of small blacktail bucks with bow and doe, lots of does. So there's my take on broadheads. Let me know in the comments, what setups work for you, what you believe are myths, and what are, proven, tried and true things for you. All right, for the last bit here, FOC. I think it's funny. There seems to be a social media YouTube war going back and forth between different people's beliefs on FOC. All of these are, I'm not gonna measure what the FOC on these guys is, but they're probably, a majority of them are in the neighborhood of like 12% FOC. It's worked for me. I don't focus on the FOC that much. There was a crazy guy that did like a Twinkie killer arrow with 8 fletch and stuff on there and a 300 grain point. I think that video was a hoax. I don't even think it was real. It can't be, but yeah. I just focus on a solid broadhead. Make sure that I'm not running a wrapped arrow with a bunch of vein on the back with a 100 grain broadhead and a standard insert. I know that would be too low. But if I'm running lightweight in the back, I can get away with a little bit lighter weight in the front. Going forward here, I shoot 60 pounds at most. Sometimes when shoulders are giving me fits, I'll have to drop down even lower. So anyways, thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments. I'm not looking to get into arguments or anything like that. I don't have the energy for that right now. But let me give you all a last side tip. Fleece on your draw stops works great. I imagine this would work on a lot of different bows, but shout out to elite shooters. If you're shooting your elite with your cable stops and not your limb stops, I just cut out some fleece, put it on my draw stops, and it makes hitting full draw fairly silent. Noticeable difference. Give it a try. Anyways, thanks again for watching. We will catch you later.